It's such a fascinating intersection of all these different, so you have a firmer government control ecosystem managing a deregulating economy with a history of inflations and debasements throughout. And in the middle sits this technology that is undilutable money. And it's sort of like, of these two worlds wrestling perfectly in the middle. And so I've always wondered how that's playing out. And I think one of the greatest fallacies of Western propaganda is the idea that we are so free and they're so oppressed. And when the reality is a lot more gray, right? Like we're oppressed, or our freedoms are managed differently here, but people in China experience a lot of freedom. There are just other things that aren't as free. Yeah. So I think that's one of the greatest probably misconceptions. Outsiders who've never been to China really don't understand, what things are like on the ground there. There have been a number of Bitcoin bans issued in China with varying degrees of failure. Is it 7? Is that?
Yeah, there's been a bunch. I mean, I have to like remember back to exactly how I categorized it, but like in the book, there's like I think 6 or 7. But yeah, there's been quite a few. But before I talk about that, like I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about what you just said, because I think it's kind of interesting as well. Something for context for the audience is one of the things that I talk about a lot, and it comes up a lot because policy people ask me about the digital yuan, or they ask me about like Chinese policy. And they're like, there's always a sense like, oh, it can't happen to us because, the West has this or this freedom or that freedom or different things like that. And I will say in China, it's like you mentioned, the freedoms are managed slightly differently. I will say their security state, I think, sometimes tends towards the extreme or paranoid about smaller instances of things. So, for example, people tweeting to like very few followers and things like that. I've definitely seen people being arrested for that. We were going to talk about this soon, but like people are arrested for trading like virtual currencies in of itself. So there definitely is law enforcement and criminal penalties for things that we in the West, I guess, or people in the West would see as not necessarily deserving that level of scrutiny or punishment. But on the other hand, I do think that people aren't, I think people think of China as so dystopian that it actually clouds your judgment on like what the implications less can be drawn for the West. And I do talk about this a lot because, for example, in the West, you have like a surveillance state as well, just in other words. And you can't really just parse over this excuse of like, oh, Chinese and Chinese people also find different ways to like escape and evade all this stuff. And they can talk about different topics. It's not like, it's not like this like instant robot ban or something. It's like, hey, you said like forbidden words, so you're instantly banned from the internet. It's not really, it doesn't really quite work that way.
And I think, and I don't mean to interrupt, but like, I think it's very true to say the average Westerner has no concept of exactly how surveilled we are. There may not be the same level of enforcement, but certainly there's a lot more information gathering going on than people might want to believe.
Yeah. I mean, I have my own, I can go to this whole other thread. I mean, I think the Chinese party state has a lot of information about different people, but in the West, it's actually baked into the system. Like the United States has information about everyone's banking correspondent records or, Visa cards or things like that. I was just talking with a friend about this. It's crazy. Apparently the FSB travels under their own credit cards in some instances. And so like, the American government's able to trace assumably the American government, don't know that we know exactly who is, but most likely the American government or American banking system is able to provide information on this like right away. Like the combination of the Bank Secrecy Act and PRISM pretty much means that like the American control of the internet rails, as well as like the US correspondent banking system and most transfers, means that like the Americans know pretty much everything. Well, not every, I should be more careful. Not like everything, but they know a lot about you, and it's like in the like rails themselves.